Oh, thank you for asking. I'm not doing too well. I've been waking up with bruises, and I've had such strange dreams, and restless sleep, and waking up with such odd and, well, really rather unpleasant tastes in my mouth, which I can't explain. Like I've been chewing on a piece of iron all night long, or something like that. I just feel so restless. I want to do this lesson that I'm going to do. I don't know. How are you, Mr. Montgomery? Are you having bad sleep? Oh, listen. What is that? What is that? Ugh! Mr. Montgomery! What happened to you? What happened to Mr. Montgomery? Oh no! Oh, no! Oh, no! With that's the end of the drama. Poor Mr. Montgomery, what happened to him? Alright, well, I guess I'm gonna have to do a lesson while I'm still human. Oh, good thing the moon went away. Anyway, guys, welcome. Today, in psychology, somebody tore up my clothes. Today in psychology, we're going to talk about a few different things. One thing we're going to talk about is the glands. And I know somebody who likes to eat glands. All right? Nevertheless, so we're going to talk about the glands. And we're really only going to talk about, the ones that are most significant for psychology. Oops, I pushed the wrong button. Dang it. Darn it. Dang it, darn it. There we go. Oh, that should go away in a second. All right, anyway, you guys. So we're going to talk about the glands today, and I'm going to talk about them in general a little bit, each of them, not each of them, but several of them. And then we're going to talk more specifically about some that are significant, and we're going to look at a famous, really well-known experiment. Okay? So, anyway, so here's the deal. I'm just going to do this. So, the glands are part of the endocrine system. Okay? Some of you may know this from biology. I'm not sure how much anatomy you guys do in biology or what the case is. But anyway, so the glands do something, they release hormones. And hormones are very, very important. I mean, there's so many different types of hormones in our body. The reason you're a teenager now and you're not a little kid anymore has a lot to do with hormones, growth hormone specifically. And you have sexual hormones and all kinds of things like that. So anyway, so Harold, man, what's going on? I don't remember. Anyway, okay, so the glands release hormones and they're made up of cells and neurons which react to specific hormones. So we have systems in our body that react in a particular way to particular hormones. Okay. This is important, which we're going to talk about. It's much slower than nerve impulses, very much slower. It takes time, all right? And so you hear of people having a hormonal imbalance and they take some form of medication to get their hormones in balance. And this is a long-term process, a longer-term process. It takes a few weeks to get things back in order. Some of them are quicker, but it takes a few weeks. All right? And it stays in the blood system. They stay in the blood system a lot longer. So that means also that it takes longer for if there is such a thing as a bad hormone, and there kind of is, we'll talk about it later, it takes longer for it to get out of the system. It's not like a neurotransmitter which gets reabsorbed in a short amount of time, or for instance a drug molecule which mimics a neurotransmitter causes a high. Well, in a few hours that goes out of the system. Okay, so this is the idea. You're not going to have to remember the glands and the hormones. It's not that kind of rote memorization. You just won't have to do that. But you do need to remember sort of the signpost studies that we'll be talking about and what sorts of hormones are indicated in these. Okay, so let's talk about the basics, okay? I'm trying some different colors up here with the yellow. I'm going to test some stuff out so we can see if I can get these to be viewed better. Anyway, I mean, once again, you do have the PowerPoints, so follow along with the PowerPoints, and this stuff is in the book as well. But anyway, so the endocrine system, the other communication system, other than the neurotransmitters and stuff like that, is made up of endocrine glands, and it produces hormones, chemical substance released into the bloodstream. It's nothing I haven't just said. So, okay. So, glands in the endocrine system. Okay. Now, some of these are very important for psychology, and some of these are less important for psychology, and they're more important for biology. And of course, our mind and our body are not separate things. Anything that can affect our body can also affect our mind, especially if you're unhealthy. You can lead to depression and anxiety and so on and so forth. But some of them are less significant, I guess you could say, for the field of psychology, per se. One, for instance, the thyroid. Releases thyroxine, a hormone that can decrease concentration and lead to irritation when thyroid is overactive. When underactive, it causes drowsiness and a slow rate of metabolism. They can generally medicate against something like this, generally. Lots of people actually have thyroid issues. Okay, parathyroid is within the thyroid. There are 4 tiny P-shaped organs. The parathyroids secrete parathormone to control balance and balance the levels of calcium and phosphate. Okay, it just balances your levels of phosphate, that kind of stuff. And so those two are not really that significant for psychology per se. I'm just putting them up there so we kind of get a run through and kind of understand what kind of thing we're talking about rather than just go to the ones that are. Okay, the penal gland is a pea-sized gland that apparently responds to exposure to light and regulates activity levels over the course of the day. Like, for instance, your sleep-wake cycle, the circadian rhythm, I think that's what it's called. That's kind of affected by the penal gland. And sure, that can affect you psychologically, but once again, it's not really a super significant one for psychology. Pancreas, nor is that. Lies in the curve between the stomach and the small intestine, controls the level of sugar in the blood by secreting insulin and glucose. So diabetics will have problems with this system. Okay. Gonads, reproductive organs. Okay. And sure, I mean, that's obviously very important for psychology, but it's not anything that you study psychologically per se. So those are some of the ones, and once again, don't just data dump these, know what they are, but you're not really going to have to be having to know them for, the psychological tests that are significant for the field of psychology. But the glands are very, very important, and a lot of the stuff that we talk about later in the future will be based on hormonal activity. And there's a couple hormones that are really actually quite significant for things and quite significant for parts of the brain, hippocampus and the amygdala specifically. And those are really, really important. Okay? More endocrine system. Now this one is important. This is important. Important. Okay, so pay attention to this. Well, pay attention to all of it. Anyway, and it's a lot of reading up there, whatever. There's a lot of words up there. But anyway, the 2 adrenal glands are located above the kidneys. Each has 2 parts in the outer covering, adrenal cortex and the inner core, the adrenal medulla. Both influence the body's response to stress. Now, This is where it becomes very, very important for psychology. They influence the body's response to stress, all right? For example, in response to a stressful situation, the pituitary gland may release ACTH, which in turn prompts the adrenal cortex to release hormones, adrenaline. Meanwhile, the autonomic nervous system stimulates the adrenal medulla to secrete hormones such as epinephrine into the bloodstream. Epinephrine is something that is used in diet medicine. It's really kind of a stimulant. Okay, now, so what happens here? And this is an important thing that you guys understand. Is so we need stress to survive. If a lion was after us when we were evolving and we were not stressed, we're like, yo, dude, yeah, look at that, man. It's like a surfer caveman. It's like, yeah, dude, whoa, look, rocks are falling, man. They died. So we have a stress and a fight or flight response to things. And this is natural and necessary for our survival. Okay, now, generally, human beings, okay, we live in a much more stressful environment and world than our biology is really designed to deal with. That's the best way to say it. Okay, now, in traditional societies, okay, people who are still living, for instance, in small tribes and jungles and, in areas around the world, call it traditional societies, I guess. I don't know what else to call it. But anyway, those types of societies, generally you have very low stress. Okay, and there's a reason for this. It's because what traditionally would happen is that people would have conflicts. People always have conflicts. People would have conflicts. But generally what would happen if the conflict was too bad, people would move somewhere else. They would start up a new village somewhere else. They would go somewhere else. If, for instance, there was conflict over hunting ground, or conflict over resources in one area, well, somebody could move to another area. Subsequently, the conflicts would subside. They were no longer conflicts. We had a way to get out of the stress. However, fast forward to 2020 in, industrial Western society, and we have all kinds of stressors. I mean, look at you guys who are getting ready for college. Look at sort of, the COVID crisis that's going on. Look at the financial issues that are going on. How am I going to afford college? How is this, families all over the place families are all over the place are, they have financial issues and stuff like this. Perhaps many people have jobs that they don't like, but they're financially stuck in those jobs because they have loans on the house and loans on the car and things like that, and kids put through college. And so all this sort of stuff. And there's no way out. Generally what would happen is in a sort of more traditional society, there would be a way out, but there is no way out. So this tells you, do not get yourself in a financial burden. Do not overload your finances. You won't be happy. But nevertheless, so what happens, or for instance, teacher, if something which you guys can relate to specifically, let's say that teachers completely overload you on homework. So much homework that you don't have time to do a good job on all of it. And you have to choose which one you don't want to do a good job on. All right? Now this causes stress. There's no way out of this situation. And especially if you had to combine it with sports and college apps and social activities and family activities in church and whatever. All these sorts of other things that are going on in your lives. And plus, let's throw the COVID crisis on it. And so, and there's not necessarily any way out of it. This causes stress. This causes a feeling of uneasiness. This causes a flight or fight response. However, there's nowhere to flight to, and there's nothing to fight. And so it just causes a perpetual state of stress. Now, you've heard stress being the silent killer, and it is. Stress kills people. And this is part of the reason of why it does it. And so, let me get a little more into it. So it releases adrenaline into the system, or cortisol. It releases cortisol into the system. And so, what's going on with my batteries? There we go. Cortisol. So what happens is you have this elevated level of stress the entire time. Okay? Now, what happens during stress? What actually is happening? What's going on? Now, the worst thing for your memory is stress, and I'm going to explain why very, very specifically. and it's really quite interesting. So anyway, cortisol and memory functions. Cortisol and memory functions and hormones on human behavior. Cortisol is produced by the adrenal cortex in response to stress. So when you are stressed out, your adrenal cortex produces cortisol. Okay? It just does that. And if you're in an elevated stress thing with a lot of stuff to do, and so, if you know yourself, if you're like totally stressed out, you have a hard time concentrating, a hard time focusing, hard time memorizing things, well, there's a reason for that. It's not because you're just stressed. Well, I mean, it is, but it isn't. But there's a direct reason is that this process is going on. And I've talked about the hippocampus before. The hippocampus is the part of your brain which is responsible for encoding short-term memory to long-term memory. And so, anyway, we'll get to what that means for this system. Prolonged stress may be that's spelled wrong. Sorry. Prolonged stress may cause prolonged cortisol secretion, can lead to damaged immune system, impairment of learning, impairment of memory. High amounts result in atrophy of the hippocampus. Now remember when I said, when we talked about drugs and stuff, that you can get so much of something it makes some of your sort of things wither away, some of your neurons wither away and parts of things. This is what happens. This is part of the thing that happens in your brain with very, very high levels of stress, is it causes the receptor neurons in your hippocampus to start to diminish, to become fewer, they die. And if you have fewer neurons firing in your hippocampus, the process of encoding short-term memory to long-term memory, and that is what learning is, it's taking short-term memory and encoding it to long-term memory, then you know something. That process is impeded by high levels of stress, and that means it is impossible for you to learn. And generally, not impossible, but it's more difficult for you to learn. And generally, what happens is that the fact that you're having a hard time learning and a hard time concentrating means that you get more stressed, and it causes a sort of like ond circle in Swedish, this evil circle. They call it a downward spiral, but I like the evil circle more. But you see what I mean, the kind of thing that happens. And then you become more stressed, and eventually what happens is somebody gets a depression, because stress will eventually lead to a depression. This is the truth. This is like exactly the process that is going on with people. And there's a reason, and I don't think it's just overdiagnosis, but there's a reason that we have I think an exceptionally elevated, I've never seen so many students that have suffered from anxiety disorder and depression as I have in the last few years. And I think, there's a lot of questions about the system itself, but that's something neither here nor there. But I mean, I've been teaching, this is my 18th year teaching, and in the last 3 years I've seen such a huge increase in this, and this COVID thing ain't helping, I'm sure. But okay, so I'm going to talk about this study here. This is an excellent study. Montgomery et al. Experiment on cortisol and memory. Okay, those are the results, but we're going to go over it kind of like the AMPRCE thing. Okay. Now, the Montgomery et al. On cortisol and memory. The aim is to examine, to explore, to investigate, whatever verb you like that means the same thing. Pick one to, I don't know, whatever. Dig into. All right, to investigate the effects of stress. I'm really mad at what happened to Mr. Montgomery? Mr. Montgomery! I see you lying back there, but I don't dare take a look. Oh, he's such a good friend. I can't believe. Well, he's easy to fix, though. But anyway, okay. To investigate the effects of stress, cortisol, and memory. So, what was the method? What was the method? Randomized, double-blind. I'm going to talk about this in just a second. Randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled comparison of 2 fixed oral doses of cortisol, either 40 milligrams per day or 160 milligrams per day, using split doses to approximate the circadian rhythm. That's what I was talking about, circadian rhythm. Given for 4 days, matched groups of healthy subjects. N was 51. There were 51 people. N in psychology, N in science generally means the number of people, at least in psychology. I'm not going to say all of science. The number of subjects in psychology is represented as N. When you see the N being 51, it means there are 51 subjects. Okay? Now, let's talk about some of the things here. Randomized double-blind placebo. Okay, this is the best type of study you can do. Complicated and expensive, but still it's the best type of study that you can do. Randomized double-blind placebo. Here's what happens. They take 51 people. They make sure they're healthy so they're not going to give them heart attacks. That's what they did, because you're actually giving them basically adrenaline, cortisol. But you know, basically it's adrenaline. So what they do is this. Now, you can't, obviously you can't tell people what they're getting, okay? You never tell the person doing the psychological experiment what condition they're getting. You never tell them, never, never. Because what happens, and this is a fact, that people adapt their behavior if they know which group they're in to what they think you are looking for. Or there's something called the screw you effect, or they will completely do something completely opposite because they don't want to do what they think you're looking for. So you don't tell them a single solitary word about what you're looking for. Do you want to be in an experiment? We're going to give you an injection. They will even lie about the injection. I don't know if they could lie with this one because cortisol is, but they probably did not tell them actually what they were looking for. They were doing memory tests after these things, after these injections. Okay? They probably did not tell them what they were actually looking for. They probably told them something else. They wanted to check if it was sleep rhythms or whatever the case is. They probably lied about that. Okay? That's one blind. So the experiment, the subjects are blind to the design and the point of the experiment. Now, double blind means the person administering. You've got to know these. These are important. So remember this. You can watch this again and again, take notes, whatever the case is. It's important that you understand what a double blind is and a single blind. Okay? Double blind means that the people, these people, that people, that people, that people, those people who are administering, who are giving the shots to the subjects, they don't know what they're giving. You have a puppet master. You have a puppet master over here, standing like this with his strings, telling the littlings what to do. And so the puppet master has it all written down and, you know, on some sort of like computer program or notebook or whatever. It says who gets what. Subject 1, subject 2 gets this, subject 3 gets this. But these people administering it don't know who's getting what. Only the person organizing the experiment knows. Okay, why did they do that? Because they found in experiments that the people administering the stuff make sort of almost subconscious cues that the subjects pick up upon, and then they adapt their behavior accordingly. So the only way to really get a good one, really good sound study, is to have the double-blind thing. And so a placebo means it's like sugar water or whatever the case is. They're probably saline solution in this case since it's being injected. They'll give people sugar pills too if they're ingesting something. But anyway, so one group got 40 milligrams of cortisol per day, which is kind of like a relatively somewhat elevated system of stress, right? Another group, which I don't know, maybe I don't know, sitting in rush hour traffic or something like that. It's hard to give except because people react to different situations differently. So it's just a relatively moderately elevated level of stress that you would actually feel. You would feel I'm kind of stressed out. But yeah, that's not that. And then the 160 milligrams, 4 times as much, that's actually a highly elevated level of stress. A very high elevated level. It's like you're stressed out, something's wrong. Something's like, what the hell, man? Blah, blah. Probably how somebody would feel right before they turn into a werewolf. Anyway, I think I'm starting to figure out what's happening to me. All right. Anyway, so the participants, 25 men and 26 women, were assigned to the highest dose of cortisol. 7 and 8 men and women were on highest, lower doses of 8 men and 8 women, and then 10 were in the placebo. Got it? So that's the breakdown of the participants. Okay? So what actually happened? What did they actually find? What are the results? The results, I will put that over there now. I will use my Spidey powers. That's up there. So what you see is, okay, Now, then they gave them a verbal memory test. They had them, what they did is they had them recount a bunch of words. Which words were used? They gave them a list of words, okay, got it? So, you know, like a random list of words, cat, beach, whatever, you know, 20, I can't remember exactly how many words, but it's a memory test, 50 words or something like that. It's in the actual sort of experiment. I think it's around 50 words or something, or maybe even a little more. But, so they gave them this memory test, and they just basically said, okay, what words did you say? What words were on the list? Please recount them. They did it in day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. And then they had a 6-day washout period. They're only showing the first 4 days in this graph here. That's the significant part of the results. After the washout period, where they still studied them for 10 days, for the next 6 days, 10 days altogether, then everybody's results went back to normal, how they were, baseline, okay? But anyway, so here's what happens in the first 4 days. As you see, okay, on the right hand, on the x-axis, on the y-axis is what I'm trying to say. On the y-axis there, that's the score. It doesn't put the number of words, but whatever, you see it's the ability to score. On the x-axis, on the bottom, it's the how many days, and you know, so with the amount of cortisol. So if you look at the placebo, they did fine. The first day they maybe they didn't do well on the first time, but anyway, so by the end of the 4th day, the placebo group had a normal memory because they were getting nothing but sort of saline solution. Okay? The cortisol people, the 40 milligram cortisol people, they had a worse memory than the placebo people, and then the 160 milligram cortisol people, they actually had a very poor memory, poor declarative memory, where they could remember exactly what was going on, what the words on the list were, and stuff like that. Okay, so that is what happened. Those are the results, and they showed very, very, very clearly. And here's the conclusion. They showed very clearly that cortisol affects memory negatively, that there's a negative influence of increased cortisol, so there's an inverse relationship between amount of cortisol and memory ability. They showed this proved. We don't use the word prove in psychology, but they showed this very, very clearly. Very clear. All right. And so, let's see how long I've been yapping. Okay, that's gonna probably do it after I'm done with this one. And so the conclusion is yes, cortisol affects memory negatively. And what's the evaluation of the study? So the evaluation, it's a good study. It's an ethical study. They got informed consent. Now what I want you guys to do is I'm going to put the link for this study in the actual video, okay? The link for the study is going in the description of the video. I want you to look at the study. It's the full study. Sometimes it's hard for them to find. Hard for them, it's hard for me to find. It's hard to find them, that's what I was trying to say. Sometimes people just share it openly. Sometimes I want you to buy it. You can look at the abstract, which is the explanation basically of what this study is about. But anyway, you can look at the abstract and then you can buy it if you want it. But so this one was actually, the whole thing was out there. So I want you to look at the study. You need to click on it, you need to take a look at it, and kind of see the build-up breakdown of how they do it. That's a good way to do your, anyway, I'm not gonna get into that right now. I was gonna say it's a good sort of idea of how to do your experiments, but it is, whatever. That's why I don't want to get into it. Sorry. That makes zero sense. It's probably because I've not been eating my vegetables properly later. I feel like I've been eating a lot of protein and fluff. All right. So in the evaluation, it's a very, very good experiment because they did the double blind, they did it right, they got informed consent from people. The results are clear and concise, and it's a very good experiment. And this has been repeated, it's replicable. Science needs to be replicable. Science needs to be replicable. If you have a one-off result in science, you have nothing at all in science. Replicability is key. And so this is replicable. And it's clear design where I could go and do it if I could do that. If I had the ability to do that, I could follow the steps and do that and get the same results, presumably. Okay? And so with that, uh-oh. Did you see that? Oh no!